Why are comics king on Kickstarter? Did you know comics is king on Kickstarter? What do I mean by comics being king on Kickstarter? Well, I'm going to cover that in this video. Thank you so much for tuning in and for checking it out. I am Tyler James. I'm the publisher of the comic and graphic novel and children's book publishing company Comics Tribe. I'm also the founder of Comics Launch Pro, and I've used the Kickstarter platform to build up my own publishing business as well as to help. And I've also helped hundreds of creators harness the power of Kickstarter to build their own audiences and launch their successful publishing endeavors as well. If this is something that you are thinking about doing, I encourage you to go grab a free resource I put together for you. It's at comicslaunch.com/roadmap. And what that is it's just going to give you some help planning your first or next successful comics launch. Now, what do I mean by comics being number one? Well, the fact is, there's been a number that I've been obsessing over since I first started podcasting on a weekly basis about the intersection of comics and Kickstarter on the Comics Launch podcast, which has been running weekly for over 5 years now. I launched the podcast in the middle of 2015. And when I launched Comics Launch, did that very first episode, I checked the stats that Kickstarter publishes freely on their Kickstarter, on the Kickstarter stats page. And if you looked at the stats, when I got started in this thing, more projects in the comics category failed to fund than were funded. Now, it was close. It was around 50-50, but when I started, more than half failed when they launched. And I thought that the podcast, Comics Launch, that because I had some success on the Kickstarter platform at that point when I started the podcast, I had already raised over $125,000 on Kickstarter, and I thought I'd figured some things out, and I thought that I could help contribute to improving that success rate and help get the word out and help creators do a little bit better and help promote creators out there, the voices of creators out there that were figuring this thing out. And since I started podcasting, I've had hundreds of creators on the podcast. I've shared the voices of hundreds of creators and hundreds of projects. And wouldn't you know it, that success rate started to tick up. Fast forward 75 episodes later, in the December of 2016, I clarified the mission of the Comics Launch podcast, that the mission of the podcast was to make comics number one in the category of success rate on Kickstarter. I wanted comic creators, the community that I'm most passionate about serving, to have their projects succeed at the highest success rate on Kickstarter. Now, back in December of 2016, we were in third place, pretty much. So we were already doing pretty good compared to other categories, but we were in third place, and I wanted that number one spot. So I've kind of been obsessed about that number, and I've been watching that number consistently tick up and up and up over the past several years, to the point where that number is at an all-time high today here in September of 2021. So you can see, back in March of 2015, 49.95% of projects successfully funded. Today, 62.29% projects have been successful in the comics category on Kickstarter. That's phenomenal growth. And you can actually see that it was during COVID and during COVID season where we had sort of one of our biggest jumps in terms of that success rate improvement. And so even in difficult times, comic creators have been able to figure out that Kickstarter platform, which has been absolutely awesome to see. And so today, comics are now king on Kickstarter. What I mean by that specifically is that if you look at it, comics, if you compare it to all the other categories, the success rate for comics on Kickstarter is number one with a bullet. And comics, you can see, are successfully funded at a significantly higher rate than the Kickstarter average. Only 39 2% of all projects that have been launched on Kickstarter since its inception have been successful. And yet, for the comics category, 62.29% of projects have been successful now. And the other great thing is that that success rate for projects in the comics category is continuing to rise. And so there really has never been a better time to be launching projects on Kickstarter than right now. Now, one thing that I wanted to just say is congrats to all of you. Congrats to the entire comic book crowdfunding community, and congrats on if you've been a part of that. If you've been a part of it, I say that means you've either launched a project on Kickstarter or you've backed a project on Kickstarter. If you played any role in this movement, in this trend, in this thing that has really meant a tremendous amount to so many people, into so many lives and so many creators out there. Congrats to you. Feel good about that. Like, you should really feel good about being a part of this. I feel great about contributing to this in my own small way. And so I'm actually going to do a little series, a little mini series, a video series on the top 5 reasons comics are king on Kickstarter. And I would love it if you haven't already to like, comment, and follow the page that you're watching this. Like, comment on the video if you can, and like and follow if you haven't, or subscribe depending upon where you're watching this stream, so that you get the rest of the videos in this series, and so that I can keep sharing the best of what's working for awesome, inspiring creators in the comics category on Kickstarter. I also want to encourage you, if you're interested in charting this path with me, to start interacting right now. Share in the comments. I would love to see, why do you think comics is the category on Kickstarter with the highest success rate? Now, over the course of this video series, I'm going to give you my top 5. But what do you think? What would you say the #1 reason why comics is the category on Kickstarter with the highest success rate? Let me know what you think, what you would say to that in the comments. And who knows, maybe you'll even appear, or your comment will appear in future episodes of this series. I would also encourage you, if you haven't recently, take a deep dive into the Comics Launch podcast archive. Again, I've been publishing weekly podcasts on comics, crowdfunding, audience building, and business building for writers, artists, self-publishers. We focus on Kickstarter, but we go much beyond that. The show has evolved over the years. And if you really want to chart this success story for the comics category and for creators in the comics category, it's archived, and this will live on beyond me, which is pretty awesome, in over 300 episodes that I've been posting weekly. And you can have access, all of them absolutely free, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And then I will really encourage you, if you haven't grabbed it yet, go to comicslaunch.com/roadmap and grab that profitable comic book Kickstarter launch roadmap if this is a journey that you're excited to get started on. All right, let me hear those comments. Why do you think comics the category on Kickstarter with the highest success rate? And I will follow up with all of you with a future installment in this series where I share you my answers to that great question.